Hi BookTube, welcome to a Sideline video and what is going to be really my open question, an open discussion question, where I'm going to give you some personal examples to take away, mull over, come to your own conclusions. And I was inspired to write this script after watching a video from Andy at Really Random Reads, so there'll be a link in my description box with that video so you can have even more food for thought. Yeah, so Andy's thoughts gave me thoughts. That's my number one reason for watching BookTube creators, to get new thoughts. Best present I can be given. Anyway, if you go to Andy's video and you use his timestamps to get to 4 minutes and 35 seconds, he talks about Jane Austen's Persuasion. It was a novel that he was persuaded to read by the enthusiastic opinions of many people, including the author John Fowles. He bought his copy of Persuasion on a visit to Bath. I mean, he did all the right things, right? Went into the Jane Austen Museum in Bath, bought his copy of Persuasion there, started reading it right away. And yeah, he hated to admit this, but he found himself a bit bored. Bored because nothing seemed to be happening in this book. And firstly, I want to say I'm in 100% agreement. Persuasion is a boring book. Not very much happens in Persuasion. So little. And Andy was comparing the response he had when he read Pride and Prejudice. He liked that book better because it was livelier, there was much more going on, there was a lot more drama. And yeah, I agree with him completely. Once I got past my prejudice against Pride and Prejudice, I enjoyed it. I had a lively sense of humor, a good pace, a lot of drama, all that. All that being said, I loved Persuasion. I loved it more than I loved Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. So why? Why? Why do I love Persuasion, even though I agree it's a very boring novel? Because I think Persuasion is about boredom, and it's about a particular kind of boredom, the boredom of confinement. And I'm quoting from Anne Elliot herself, the protagonist of Persuasion, when she talks about women of her generation in general. And she says, "We live at home, quiet, confined, and our feelings prey upon us." And this confining type of boredom, I'm sure everybody has experienced at least a little of it, but some of us will have experienced more of it than others. It's the boredom that happens if you have to work long hours in a job that you didn't choose to do, but you have to do because you need the money. Or you're bringing up very young children, babies, toddlers. Or on the other side, you have relatives who are older or ill or have a disability or are suffering from dementia, and you are their main carer. That creates a confinement and a boredom for the carer themselves. Or if you're suffering from a condition like long COVID, where you're never sure what your energy levels are going to be. And so the choices you might want to make about what you do with your day, your body might say, no, you'll have to do something far, far more boring today because I can't deal with anything else right now. Or another possible situation, you're in your 20s, you'd love to move out of your parents' home where you're living right now, set up on your own, get things moving and work out for yourself what your style is and what you want to do with that home, but you can't. You're stuck where you are, and that means you're confined in the sense that you can't make choices about what your surroundings look like, or the amount of privacy you get, or what kind of hospitality you might like or not like to offer others. That's all out of your hands. And so that can create a certain confining kind of boredom. So I do think that any of these groups of people would be able to identify to some degree with the quality of boredom in Persuasion, which is the boredom of confinement. And Anne Elliot is the protagonist of Persuasion, for those who've not read the book, and she is the middle child of a very well-to-do family who live in Somerset, in the country, so not anywhere near a city. They're in a very small village. And so Anne Elliot experiences confinement on several different levels. Firstly, she's confined by the rural environment she lives in. There just aren't a lot of people within the vicinity for her to have company with. So she does end up with a lot of time in solitude or a lot of time with the same people. Also, her class because she is upper class, her father is a baron, and therefore she would be expected, there's only certain people in that village that she would be encouraged to spend more than the absolute necessary amount of time with. Again, so that shrinks her social group, shrinks the number of things that she can do with her day. Then there is her gender. Of course, she's female. And at the time the story is set, which is in the 18 teens, so while the Napoleonic Wars are still ongoing, women were very confined. Their movements outside the home, they couldn't leave the home unaccompanied. It was generally frowned upon. Now, not that they couldn't go for walks in the immediate vicinity of their home, but they couldn't, for example, get on a horse, ride into town, take a train somewhere, not by themselves. To travel unchaperoned, not only was it frowned upon, it actually was rather dangerous. And I've just said train travel. Of course, there wouldn't have been train travel in England at that time. The only travel would have been by horse and vehicle. And again, that was considered to be dangerous for a woman to do unaccompanied. If you'll remember Pride and Prejudice, if you've read that, you'll remember that Elizabeth couldn't go down to see her friend Charlotte without somebody coming with her on the journey, preferably an adult male. At least one adult male. Wasn't really looked upon well for women to travel on their own, even in groups, and particularly not young women. And fourthly, there is Anne's marital status. A woman in her time, her future was fixed. She's supposed to get married and that she's supposed to have children, and her life is supposed to revolve around raising those children and looking after whatever management and administrative needs the home has. And a woman who didn't do this, a woman who was unable to marry or for whatever reason, had no place in society. Anne is also the middle of three daughters. That means she has an older sister who's going to take precedence over her, who's probably going to be the one given opportunities to get a husband first. And her younger sister is also married. So for Anne, there's almost an invisibility that she suffers in terms of no one really wants her opinion or input in what happens in the home, because she is the invisible one. She is neither the oldest and therefore the first in line, the one who's expected to produce an heir when they find a husband, but neither is she like her younger sister, who has married and has had children and therefore acquires a certain seniority for having done what was expected of her as a woman of her time. Of course, even if Anne Elliot were to marry, it wouldn't increase her freedom that much. The truth is that the only freedom that an upper-class English woman of Anne Elliot's time could have had was freedom of thought. And for that reason, all the action of persuasion, really, all the drama, is internal. It is taking place inside Anne Elliot's mind. External drama, well, that didn't come with the job of being an upper-class woman in the early 19th century. And I think the reason Persuasion is often critically held to be Jane Austen's best novel is because it was her last. She was a little older. She was still in her 20s, but she was a little older. And I think the years of her own life, which must have been very similar to Anne Elliot's in terms of that boredom of confinement, I think she was really beginning to feel them. And I think she wrote that boredom into Anne's everyday life in a way where the realism was starker, therefore it's less funny, therefore it seems boring. And Andy, by the way, if you are watching this, I'm not at all hoping that you'll go pick the book up and read it again. That really isn't the point of doing this video. I think the discussion question, which I'm now actually going to get to, I've been avoiding it now, just talking about Persuasion, but the discussion question I really want to get to is, how is it that a book can be boring to one person and not boring to another one? And to illustrate that, I'm going to talk about a book that bored me. The book that I struggled with was Jack Kerouac's On the Road. And I'm going to mention in my description box Dan from Ridiculous, because I recently watched a video where he waxed eloquent about his love for On the Road. And I think he could bring something to this conversation, I bet, that would be valuable. So, Andy, I'm going to include him. I finished On the Road some years ago, around the year 2000, I think, but I struggled through it for the sake of literature only. I found it boring. And so I want to understand, why am I okay with the kind of boredom in Jane Austen's Persuasion, but I was not okay with Kerouac's On the Road. So what I did, because I got rid of my original copy of On the Road, I just didn't think I'd read it again. But my library, thankfully, had an ebook copy. I downloaded that onto the BorrowBox app, and I read as far as Jack's narrator getting to Denver, Colorado, just to remind myself, what was it about this book that bored me exactly, and could I establish something concrete as a reason for that boredom? If we look at what the narrators of the two books, how their lives are, you'd have to say that Jack Kerouac's narrator, who's a young single man in the United States in the late 40s, that he's a much freer person. I mean, he decides to take a break from writing his novel to go hitchhiking across the United States from New York to Denver. And he was pretty free before that because he was living at home with his mother, and she was doing all the cooking and looking after him. So he had complete free time to spend on his writing. So he's then on the road. And while it's true that his fate depends to some degree on the kindness of strangers, there seems to be a lot of that in 1947. And also his money seems to go an awful lot further. It's the kind of freedom that probably couldn't be obtained now. It's be much more expensive and more risky trip for anybody to make now, but not so much in 1947. Two things struck me as I was reading the book. One, I found myself being annoyed because the protagonist had all this freedom, and yet what he did to me seemed like nothing. What he did with his time. Yes, he was here, and then he was somewhere else, and then he was somewhere else. But I mean, along the way, it seemed to me all he kind of did was eat the same food, drink the same booze, and, talk with people who I didn't think had a great deal to say. I remembered that this had annoyed me before, the first time I read it. And I also started to notice the women in the book. And maybe that was because it struck me that the freedom that Jack Kerouac's narrator had was underpinned to some degree by those people who were more confined. And yes, a lot of those were women, waitresses in the diners that he ate in. His mother, who of course kept his sort of base camp there at her home to which he could return to, and she was the one that encouraged him to go out. She would make his meals for him and then also go to work herself. You had that confinement, and then you had the people that took him for rides, gave him lifts. Some of those people you could tell were locked into jobs where they didn't have a lot of freedom either. And so the freedom that he had was really upheld by all these other people who did not have so much freedom. And I found that basically a little bit irksome. So maybe it's not so much boredom as annoyance, but I found that what I was feeling, that sort of antipathy toward the book, was really because the freedom that Jack's narrator had was a freedom I had never experienced. And I couldn't really, maybe I couldn't identify with it properly. Certainly what I felt was that I was almost yearning for the character to do more with the time that they had because they had it, do more with the freedom that they had because they had it. I knew that characters like Anne Elliot or other women who were more confined spent their days doing the same thing, eating the same thing, talking to the same people about the same subjects. I expected a young man like Kerouac's narrator to kind of break free of that, because I mean, look, he's got freedom. So freedom surely means we go looking for better things, not just the same old, same old, same old. But it felt like I was still getting the same old, same old, same old, even though the character was more free. Maybe I could even say that it seemed to me that Jack Kerouac's protagonist, that he didn't think of freedom as something being in short supply, that in the sense that it seemed to me that he felt it was fine to waste some of it, or it seemed wasteful to me. Again, we're talking about my personal reaction to the book. I got frustrated because it just seemed like he was wasting time, and I thought, wow, freedom is such a rare thing and it doesn't last long, and here you are just doing what you're doing, and I don't think that's very interesting. Perhaps then you could say that for me, Anne Elliot's boredom was at least familiar. I recognized it, and I sympathized a little bit more because I could tell that it wasn't easy to escape from. Whereas, again, with Kerouac's narrator, I thought, well, he certainly has means of escape. He has sometimes some choices and he takes them, and then sometimes too he confines himself by his choices. So sometimes I think my boredom or frustration was that he would choose something that I think, no, that's just going to be more confining or more boring, or you're just going to do the same old again. Why don't you try something different? You have freedom, so why wouldn't you try something different? So on the one hand, we have persuasion, where the boredom is caused by having a lack of freedom to do very many different things. And then on the other hand, you have on the road, where the boredom is caused, to my mind anyway, by this abundance of freedom that is nevertheless being used to do very similar things over and over and over again. And Andy, I'm really thankful, because it never occurred to me to step back and look at that aspect of those two books, the way the characters do or don't have freedom and what they do with the time that they have. And it's going to make me reread On the Road. Maybe not right away. I have so many books lined up, it is not funny. But I now know the library has it on ebook, so it's there whenever I want to pick it up. But so I'm really pleased. Thank you very much, Andy. It's wonderful when somebody says something and it twigs a thought process in your mind, which goes through some stages to get to the other end. And thanks everybody for watching. I would love to hear any or all thoughts you have on either of those books, whether you loved them, hated them, why you loved them, hated them. Let's get some discussion going. I'd absolutely love that. And in the meantime, everyone, I'm going to go away now and get a fiction review ready for you, because I finished many books. I have books lined up to read. I have many books that I've finished reading, but you haven't heard about yet. So I've got some work to do. So I'll talk to you again soon. Take care in the meantime. Bye-bye.